Hey everybody, Joe here. This is Psychedelics Today podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We have Elizabeth Gibson from Dreamshadow Breathwork on, and Kyle and I have a great time talking to her. She is one of our primary mentors in the breathwork space, and we're really happy to be able to share her voice and experience with you on the show. If you want to find more of her info, search Dreamshadow, dreamshadow.com. And without further ado, here is Psychedelics Today with Elizabeth Gibson. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Here we are, February 4, 2016, with Elizabeth Gibson. Hi.
Hi.
And so Kyle and I know you fairly well. I've been working with you guys in Vermont since 2003. 13 years.
Wow.
It's pretty wild.
And I've been working with you since 2010.
Awesome. So, Elizabeth, as way of introduction, Kyle and I'll probably do an intro track before we play this part, but you're a breathwork facilitator in Vermont. You also write for some local newspapers. You've done some work with Stan Grof, helping him edit some of his written material, and you helped. I don't actually know your role in the project, the MDMA protocols. Did you help write it? Help edit?
I helped edit the manual for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy.
Great, and that's what's being used for training psychotherapists that want to do the MDMA psychotherapy work. And it's actively being used right now, right?
Yeah, and you can look at it's at the MAPS website, and it's gone through several iterations now. I think I worked on it a few years ago, but I've tried to keep up with it since then.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I definitely read that a number of years ago. I should keep updated with what they've been doing lately. So we were just talking, actually, this is a good segue, right before we were recording, that you were able to participate in legal MDMA therapy work before it became illegal in the States. Can you tell us a little bit about how did you get introduced to it?
Sure. This was after our son was born. I experienced a pretty classic case of postpartum depression, and that was when I realized that I needed to get some therapy because I obviously wanted to be a good mom, and I was struggling with a lot of difficult feelings, and I was pretty scared. So Lenny had already made contact with Stan by then, and Stan recommended a therapist to us in the Boston area. And so I went to, his name was Rick Ingrassi, and I went to see him for standard psychotherapy, and he was very helpful. He did some experiential stuff. We did rolfing, which was very intense, very interesting. And then he also brought my parents in for some sessions, which was extremely useful too. And then he suggested doing MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. I don't remember exactly what he called it, but he explained what we would be using, and we talked about it for a while. And I went and I did one session with him, and it was it was a very important experience for me and helped me a lot. And I can talk more about that if you want.
Yeah, sure thing. Like, what does that look like, or what did that look like at the time you were doing it?
Yeah, well, it was just a one-on-one session with him. So I went to his office in Watertown, and I drank some orange juice and waited for a while. And then after it had started to come on, I probably spent a couple of hours with him. And then at the end of the session, Lenny came over with Chip, who was then a little baby, and picked me up. And we had this nice kind of reunion afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And during the session itself, I didn't have eye shades, but I did listen to music and talked with the therapist a lot. And basically, for the first time in my life, spent an extended period of a couple of hours realizing what it was like to be in a state where I didn't feel afraid of anything. There was no anxiety, and I was pretty much totally in the moment. I remember listening to some Bach music and realizing that Bach was basically channeling God through his music. I mean, I had heard that music before, but I hadn't really heard it that way. And it was obvious to me at the time. And I think that changed my relationship with music. It certainly changed my relationship with myself, and that it gave me a window on another way of being that was free of anxiety, which has been a problem for me since childhood because of a lot of difficult issues in my childhood. And I'm trying to think what else to say about the session. I remember in the days afterwards when I went back to work like the next day. So I didn't have a long time to integrate the experience, but even when I was back at work for several days afterwards, I could feel that something important inside had shifted, and all of the concerns at work, at my job, just didn't seem so earth-shattering anymore. I had more perspective. And it certainly helped me deal with the depression I'd been struggling with as a young mother and feeling very conflicted about now having a child, and also I had gone back to work. So there was a big conflict for me because my life had changed so fundamentally after giving birth that being at work just didn't feel like where I wanted to be anymore. And eventually it took me a few years, but eventually I just stopped working altogether and ended up homeschooling our kids. And that felt better. And I think the MDMA session gave me a point of reference that enabled me to make those decisions, knowing that the kind of conflict I was trying to embrace wasn't good for me, and it wasn't good for my family. So it was extremely helpful. I spent some time after it sort of feeling nostalgic and wishing I could live in that state all the time and wanting to recapture it. And it took me a while to figure out, and I think I'm almost still figuring that out, that it's not about being in that particular state, but just being able to appreciate whatever state I'm in. But that was the start of that understanding in a deeper way for me. And certainly helped get me started on the path that a few years later, probably about 3 or 4 years later, led me to holotropic breathwork, knowing that there was a much bigger perspective and a much deeper level that I needed to tap into to understand myself and some of the difficult feelings I was experiencing as a parent, which I think in a sense, being a parent was bringing up a lot of the experiences I had had when I was a child, because it was like almost revisiting my own childhood again, having a child of my own. So when I talk about it now, it's really interesting to me to think that that MDMA session came at such a pivotal time in my life, and also pivotal in terms of the history of MDMA psychotherapy, because after that year, it no longer was available as a sanctioned therapeutic modality. And, anybody who wanted to do that kind of do it in a way that couldn't be above board, which is really a real tragedy, I think. So.
And how long was it legal for before it became illegal in therapy?
Well, I guess you have to, first of all, figure out when Shulgin synthesized it, because it was basically until the authorities caught up with, what he had created. And I don't know. I've got his book right here, but I don't think it was very long, Kyle.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know they were using it in like couples therapy and, therapy in general for a number of years before it became illegal. I just wasn't too sure how long that was.
I would guess off the top of my head 10 or 15 years, but we'd have to look that up to be sure.
Yeah. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
And
it's really interesting.
And you only did one session, correct?
I did one session in a standard psychotherapeutic session with Rick. I continued to work with him after that, but we only did the one session. Mm-hmm. It was before the protocol that Michael and Annie and that MAPS is promoting, way before that had been developed. So there was none of the extensive kind of preparation that they do and the follow-up. And I also think the fact that there are two therapists present in that protocol, male and female, is really important. And it just makes the container more safe. It's not that efficient in terms of, hours of therapy time that go into one session. And I think Will has actually done some calculations on the cost of, the standard MDMA protocol as it's laid out now. And it's kind of pricey, but compared to a lifetime of therapy,
it saves some money.
Lifetime of not getting that time of help, it's pretty cost effective. And then when you consider that breath work, which is another modality that basically taps into the same kind of intelligence in all of us, that's done in a group setting, I mean, that raises the efficiency quotient quite a bit. Mm. And I don't know I've often wondered if psychedelic therapy with the right kind of training and container could be done as group work. I don't know if anyone's looked at that, but it's an interesting question, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember Lenny saying that it probably wouldn't work, but yeah, it'd be interesting to look at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like it depends on the drug being used. Like in the ayahuasca world, that seems to work as a group thing, but the drug is a little complicated. It's a little more complicated than a single molecule at a time. You're doing a lot of stuff at one time with ayahuasca, but people are largely sitting on the ground, not running around. Mm-hmm. Maybe you have to go to the bathroom once. But if that could be structured appropriately, that would be really interesting and work with good psychiatrists that way. I think MAPS just started doing research there, right?
If you look at the history of psychedelic use and you go back to the ancient Greeks and the Eleusinian mysteries, those were huge crowds that were participating in some kind of ritual involving a psychedelic substance. So certainly it's possible given the right context. And I think it's an important question. And I'm sure that if MAPS isn't already looking at that, somebody will be pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think we do need to keep asking that question for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Will, you mentioned Will. Will's a medical student in Boston working to bring some psychedelic psychedelic studies to phase 3 in Boston. Is that right?
He's actually a psychiatrist. He's finished his medical training, and he is psychiatry practice now. And at the same time, he's also starting to train as a therapist with Michael and Annie to do the MDMA assisted psychotherapy work at some point himself. So
that's awesome.
He's helping MAPS network, I think, in the Boston area.
So hopefully in the future, it will finally maybe hit the East Coast up in New England.
Oh, yeah. I think they're definitely planning on doing that. But they've got this thing going now at CIIS, and I think they're going to have to stagger them somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
Michael, did Michael and Annie talk to you, Kyle, about training? It just said you needed to be a therapist, a licensed therapist, and then you could get involved shortly afterwards?
Yeah, I sat down with them with Lenny and Elizabeth. We all went out to lunch after the Grof conference in San Francisco, and I was asking them about how to go about getting into the training, and they said that MAPS is going to start training during their phase 3 studies, and they're going to need a lot of therapists. And yeah, they just told me to get any sort of licensure. So that could be counseling licensure, maybe social work, just be a licensed counselor, or, if you wanted to, you could go get your PhD or, medical degree. But yeah, any sort of licensure, that's what I kind of came down from them.
I think the idea is that since the work will be done with a pair of therapists, only one of them is going to need to be able to have the credentials necessary to administer the medicine, which is going to require, nurses can do that and doctors can do that.
Right. Yeah. So it'd be a team.
So not everybody has to have that kind of training, but probably one of them will.
So maybe you could have a facility with one nurse or doctor, a psychiatrist above them helping out there, and then maybe 5 teams in the building at the same time, 5 teams of 2.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So that seems relative. You're right that it doesn't seem efficient, but you could probably scale it in a way that it could eventually become pretty reasonable.
It's more efficient, Joe, though, than 7 years of classic psychoanalysis that doesn't even tap into the same depths.
Absolutely. It's a lot of time and money wasted, and time being not well if you're not in a good state.
And there may be some guidelines, too, at the MAPS website about what the requirements are for people who want to go into the training. I'm sure that information is out there for anyone who's interested in going down that road.
Cool. And that's maps.org for anybody who isn't aware.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, they have student resources on there, and I've definitely looked through it a bunch on how to get into psychedelic psychotherapy, what routes to take. There's a great article that tells you, if you're a student, maybe what to study and whatnot. So yeah, there's some good resources on there. Mm-hmm.
So let's bring it back to you, Elizabeth. When did you start the training for holotropic breathwork? Let
me work backwards. I finished the training in 94. So I must have started, and I went through at a pretty good clip. It was a minimum of 2 years. So I must have started in 1992 after doing a number of holotropic breathwork workshops as a participant with Gail and Michael Shaw they were living in Charlotte up near Burlington, Vermont at the time. And they had been recommended to Lenny and me by Stan. So we started doing our initial personal breathwork with them, after having gone to a couple of big workshops with Stan. And then I went into the training in 92 and finished in 94.
That's great. And did you, as soon as you finished, did you start hosting your own workshops?
We had... Oh, okay. I started in 94 and finished in 96. That's right. Sorry. Not 94.
No worries.
Finished in 96. We started doing workshops in 94 because by then Lenny had finished the training program. He was in the class of 94, and Michael Mithoefer was in Lenny's training group. And Michael and Annie were then living in Dorset, Vermont, which happened to be the next town to us in Paulet, which, if you know how tiny these towns are and how rural we are, that's quite a synchronicity.
Yeah.
So Lenny and Michael were very psyched to begin offering workshops as soon as they were done with the training. So they got together and with Annie and me, who were just kind of getting into this at the time, and we started doing workshops as a foursome in 1994. So at the same time that I was going through the breathwork training, I was also helping out at the workshops that we were offering with Michael and Annie, which was great because those initial workshops were small, like maybe 12 people per workshop. So we had Michael there and Lenny there, and Annie, who her training was in nursing, and I was just getting started. But between all four of us, we felt pretty confident. And Michael has a background in, before he went into psychiatry, he worked as an emergency room physician. So we felt like we had pretty much all the bases covered.
Yeah, that's an awesome team. And when you were doing the training, was Stan there for a lot of it?
Yeah, he was always there back then. Mm-hmm. Christina had started to step back. I think Lenny and Michael's group was the last training group where Christina was there all the time. Mm. And then by the time I was the next training group after Michael and Lenny's group, and Christina had begun to step back. So I only actually saw her a few times during my training, which there was a sense of loss going on in the community then because she had been such an important part of the training. And the people who were kind of stepping in for place to provide that female kind of presence at the training modules were Kylea Taylor and Diane Hogue. Diane is still working at some of the GTT modules that are offered. And Kylea has retired pretty much from breathwork now, I think. But they were wonderful, and I really appreciated their presence during the training. Mm. But Stan was there all the time. He was all of the modules I went to, except for the optional module that Stan does with Jack Kornfield on the East Coast. But all the other modules I went to were either in Pocket Ranch, which was a wonderful retreat center north of San Francisco. And then I finished the training at another facility in Oregon, outside of Portland, Oregon, in a little town called Wilsonville. So it was all pretty much on the West Coast.
And were these...
Stan was there at all of the modules. And, he was there for the sessions as well as giving the lectures.
And these were the week-long modules? This was like after they did the month-longs?
Yeah, it was. So it was, they were either 5 or 6 day modules, and they always did 2 at a time. So if you wanted to get 2 in for, people who had to travel a long way. So sometimes I was out there for a couple of weeks.
Oh, okay.
In fact, I think probably just about every time I went to California, I went for 2 weeks just to save on the plane fare and the travel expenses, which was wonderful. I mean, to have 2 weeks of that in those kinds of settings was pretty profound. And I can imagine what the month-longs.
Oh, man. Yeah. How many sessions would you do while you were in training? Like
It was the same as it is now. It would be like in each module, in each 5 or 6 day module, there would be 4 breathwork sessions total.
Okay.
But there were also breakout rooms, and people seemed to be kind of in process all the time.
Yeah.
There was always something going on in addition to the lectures and the group sharing. And that was nice too, because in those days, Stan would come to the group sharings. You know, he would be there for everything. So to be able to hear him talk about some of the archetypal aspects of the mandalas, or, you know, the themes or different cultures, all that he had learned from Joseph Campbell during the group sharing was really special too. I went back for a few modules after I had finished the training, and after my group, he started to pull back himself a little bit. And I can remember going back to Wilsonville maybe a year or 2 after I had finished. And by then he wasn't going to the group sharings anymore, which I thought was, you know, definitely a loss, because he added so much. But, you know, you can't do everything. I understood. Although he loves, you know, because of that artistic background that Stan has, he loves the drawings, and that whole part of it has always been really important to him. So I'm not sure how that all developed, but I think it was just getting to be too much for him to do everything.
In your workshops, what with Christina, what was she doing in the course of the retreat? Would she just kind of pop in and pop out, or was she there?
She would just, I never remember her being there for the breathwork sessions.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes she would be around when Stan was talking. I think I remember her being at the early insight and opening retreats I went to with Jack Kornfield and Stan. And Christina was part of that team for longer. And even when I began helping at those events at Omega many years after I was certified, she would be part of the team there. So I did get and do the music. She always, in the early days, she was the one who did the music and did wonderful music. And I think a lot of Tav's early music collections were stuff that Christina had passed on to him. But when I was actually out at Pocket Ranch in Wilsonville, I didn't see her that much, Joe.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you did connect with her later down the line a little bit?
Yeah, well, I had actually connected to her before I went into the training, when I went to my first big public workshop in Provincetown and had a huge experience and needed a lot of body work. She helped me a lot with that. And so I would run into her out of the context of the training over the years. But of course, I never knew her as well as I knew Stan.
That's interesting. So I guess let's talk a little bit about that. Let's maybe go chronologically. So, in my opinion, what you guys have developed over there in Paulette is almost the gold standard of breath work. That's my experience of it, at least. And you're very regularly hosting workshops. Do you guys think you do anything unique at your workshops, like, compared to what you see other folks doing?
Well, first of all, I should say probably the reason we've been fortunate to have so much experience with breath work. It's been 22 years now. And we've been fortunate that we've been able to devote that amount of time to it over the years. So I think a lot of it is just having so much experience with it. In terms of the particular spin on our workshops, we've tried really hard to stay true to the original form of the technique that we were taught in the training. with the added dimension of Lenny's background in philosophy. So Lenny has a whole metaphysical framework in addition to the framework that Stan offers. I mean, Stan offers his whole cartography of the psyche and the transpersonal aspects, all of those dimensions. And then Lenny has, because of Lenny's background in philosophy, he has his metaphysical training and can offer that as a way of understanding the kinds of experiences that people have as well, for those people who are interested in that kind of approach, as you know, Joe, from your training in philosophy.
Right. I've spent a lot of time talking to him about it.
Yeah, so I don't think there's many people in the breathwork community that have that background in philosophy. I mean, there are lots of people who have other kinds of backgrounds, and then it's easy to bring your own particular sort of spin into the workshops that you offer. But I think it's also really important, if you're doing holotropic breath work, or really any kind of breath work, to stick to the non-dogmatic kind of context that Stan taught us. So what you're really trying to do is just create a safe container and encourage people to open and support them without laying any kind of interpretation or dogma on them. I think that's really, really important, and that's one of the most valuable things about what we were taught. There's no judgment, there's no interpretation. What we are doing is supporting people in their own process of self-discovery, and then trying to support them as they head out back into the world, which is that integration piece, which is a whole nother topic, very important topic.
Kyle, do you have experience working with other folks in breathwork?
No, I've really just worked with Lenny and Elizabeth. I've never been to any of the GTT trainings or anything like that. So I think I would like to get to one.
Yeah, it would be good. I would encourage you guys, as you work more with this, just to explore and try other modalities, just to get a sense of what's out there and what, what feels right for you. With just that caveat that it's really easy when you're working with people and they're very open and there's a lot of transference going on. It's really easy to or tempting maybe, to step into the role of being some kind of authority. And I think one of the most important things about being a facilitator is to be very humble about what's going on. And remember that the work isn't about the facilitator, it's about what's going on with each person in the room and what you can do to kind of get your ego out of the way and just support that. And that's a challenge that you never really completely master, and it's one that you continue to work with as long as you're hosting workshops, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I certainly haven't totally mastered that. And anyone who says they have is probably fooling themselves.
Yeah, long process. I've only done workshops with Ken Sloan and his wife. That was a wonderful workshop we did
Petra.
In Denver.
Yeah, so they were
Petra.
in a training group, yeah.
And then that was a great workshop. It was kind of paired with Zen Buddhist flavor.
Where was Joe? Was that in Germany?
Denver.
Oh, in Denver.
Denver.
Oh, when Ken was living in Denver, right?
Yeah, well, they actually only lived maybe a mile and a half from me when I was in Boulder.
That's
and I wish I got to spend more time with them.
Mm-hmm.
We should probably talk to them in the future. And then I got to do Insight and Opening in Omega, and it was kind of funny. But I paired up with Elizabeth and Sandy Phocas.
Yeah.
Sandra Phocas. Wonderful facilitator pair. And I had a great time. And watching Stan work with people was
I had already
overtime?
met you before that Omega.
We had done, maybe a few years of workshops at that point. So I had a lot of experience with you. I think it was like I was comfortable jumping in your group. So I was like, okay, let's do that. And then watching Stan work the floor was pretty amazing. I watched him do some body work with the guy I was paired up with. And kind of his talk track was pretty amazing. Back and forth with the breather. I don't know that I'll ever be able to do what he did, but at least I got to watch it.
Well, I think the idea is to see what he does, or see what any effective facilitator does, and somehow take that in and then make it your own. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't try and be Stan on the floor. I'm not big enough. I'm not, but kind of the presence that he brings to the experience is what I try to cultivate in myself. Mm. And so Kyle, for many years, Stan and Jack Kornfield offered these wonderful retreats that combine Vipassana meditation, which Jack is trained in, with holotropic breathwork. And they were 5, 6, and eventually 7-day retreats, because at Omega, the longer workshop format was required a 7-day event. So those workshops were pretty special because of the length of time, and also because of the combination of meditation and breath work. And they continued doing that. I mean, they started doing those workshops in the early 1990s. Mm. And I don't know, Joe, what year it was when you went to Omega, but they had been doing them pretty regularly every year.
My guess is 07, 09.
Yeah. And I think there may have been 1 or 2 more after that. And then they called it quits, and I don't know if it will ever happen again. I just don't know. I kind of doubt it. But they were really, they were special events, and I felt really lucky to be able to work at them because it was extremely good training. Mm. But I should also say, in terms of training, that being a participant is very important as a training. So, like when you're trying to learn about bodywork, which is on my mind now because we've got this 5-day coming up on bodywork, it's not just about doing bodywork with participants, but opening yourself up to bodywork and experiencing the bodywork yourself. Because a lot of times now when I'm doing bodywork with people at our workshops and I don't really know what's going on, and I start to get overwhelmed or uncertain or sort of insecure about it, then it's really helpful for me to refer to tough situations I was in when I was on the floor breathing, and how the body work helped me. And when I recall those experiences, that usually gives me the energy I need to continue to support somebody, even though I have no idea where we're going with it. But I know that if I just stick with them and support them, that eventually we'll come out on the other side, even though I have no idea how we're going to get there.
I feel like you have some pretty good intuition, always watching you work. It just always blows my mind about sometimes like you're doing certain things. I remember watching you and pushing somebody's head down and pushing their knees up. And I just like, how did you know how to push the head, or place your hand on the head with the knees. But always learning new things when I'm watching you work. And I'm always referring back to like my own experiences with bodywork as well when, I'm on the floor working with people. So yeah, personal experience with the bodywork is definitely important, I feel
personal experience and then observation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just like going back in the room and watching what's going on in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also learned from Stan during the early stages of a workshop when there's not a whole lot for the facilitators to do, often in the first hour or so. I mean, sometimes there is, but there's also a lot of standing around too. But Stan would always walk around the room and look at people, really. He would observe them closely. And that struck me because it's easy to just sort of get bored and wish that something would happen when it's quiet in the room. But another approach is to really kind of tune into people energetically in the early stages because you can pick up clues about their process that might be helpful later on.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something else I learned from him. But in doing that, I think it's important when you're walking around the room and looking at people, it's not like you get down and zero in on them in an intrusive sort of way. You just sort of let them have their space, but watch them closely just to try and get a sense of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm always looking if people are like maybe poking around their body or they seem like some part or their body's in distress. When I usually check in, I'll ask them how that's feeling.
Yeah, that's helpful. If you notice, like at the end, maybe somebody will say, "Oh, there's nothing going on. I'm fine," and you can tell that there's something more there. And you can say, "Well, in the early part of the session, I saw you working, pressing here a lot. You want to see if there's anything there." I mean, it can be really helpful to have that data to refer back to. And then if people are willing to give it a try, oftentimes that can be what you need to help them finish up a piece that may need some more work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm kind of curious about your own experiences. How's like doing breath work yourself over these past few years like kind of transformed your life, or was there any like comparison between like your session with the MDMA session and any of your breathwork sessions?
Yeah, I mean, I think one important difference so far between psychedelic therapy and breathwork is I haven't seen much body work going on in psychedelic therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I did talk to Michael about this when I saw him in November when we were at that conference at Harvard. And he said, because I remember Michael doing amazing body work back when we first started doing workshops together, but when you look at the tapes that he shows of the MDMA sessions, they're mostly occasionally talking with the person when they take their eye shades off and want to talk, and maybe holding their hands or something like that, but there's not as much body work going on in those sessions, nearly as much as what you see in holotropic breathwork. And Michael said that sometimes they offer body work in the follow-up sessions to the psychedelic therapy, to the actual MDMA sessions, but that during the actual MDMA session, no, there's not nearly the level of body work that there is in breath work. So that's an interesting difference, and I'm not sure if that's going to shake out somehow in a different way, because what I got from the holotropic breath work that I had not previously gotten in any of the experiential work that I had done, and I did some on my own, and I did recreational stuff when I was much younger, was I had never had the kind of work with the body.
Mm.
And so during the breathwork training, I had one really, really difficult breathwork experience where I basically spent the whole session in an extremely dissociated state. The session had started off with my being presented a portal. I mean, that was what I saw, was a portal. And it became very clear that for me to embark on this session, all I had to do was go through that portal. And I thought, well, and in order to get through the portal, it was very clear that what I had to do was say my name, and I would get through and I would be on my way. And I thought, oh, well, this is easy. I'll just say my name and jump in and I'll be off. And so I started to say my name, and I said my name, Elizabeth, and that didn't work. And then I had to think of other names for myself, nicknames, any kind of name I could think of, and none of my names worked. So I had this experience of like realizing I had no idea who I was or who I needed to be in order to get through this portal. And then the image of the portal became an eye, and I realized it was the eye of my mother, and that at birth there was no bonding and even a sense of rejection, a profound sense of rejection. And then when that moment of awareness hit, I just completely spaced out. I became catatonic. I literally didn't move for the whole session, and I wanted so desperately to ask for help in my head. I wanted to ask. I was saying the names of all the facilitators in the room, but I couldn't express that. And the only way I got out of that state, it was a very scary place to be for 2 hours. I mean, I think on some level I knew if I wanted to, in an emergency, or I could have forced myself to get up, but the feeling was so powerful that I really stayed in it. And the only way I got out of that at the end was with very, very intense body work, the kind of body work where you're lifting the person, and just whole body work with 2 people working on me for quite a while. And that piece, the piece of that body work, was so helpful that I think a big lesson from that particular experience, which I still refer to a lot, is the importance of body work. That these kinds of experiences aren't somehow complete without the connection either that the person is able to make on their own with their body, or that you help them make with the body work. And that's why at the end of the session, one of the questions I often ask people, beyond how they're feeling or what's going on in their body, is, do you feel like you're in your body? Do you feel like you're back? Mm-hmm. Because if people leave the session and they're not really back and integrated, and we've had people come to our workshops who have just done psychedelic work, but they're not really back somehow, and just the body work can be so helpful for that. So I personally would like to see that dimension somehow get integrated more into psychedelic therapy. And I think it's really exciting that MAPS is incorporating holotropic breathwork as part of the training for the therapists, because the therapists will hopefully get that when they do the holotropic breathwork part of the training.
Perhaps when they read the history, they'll notice that Stan did talk about the origins of bodywork being with the LSD work initially. Just kind of like happenstance showed up in the LSD work.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're just doing it right now to get through the legal stuff, and then perhaps therapists on their own could bring that in later.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I hear about, people who go to ayahuasca ceremonies too in this country. I know there's a whole cultural context around those ceremonies that's really important, but there's no kind of physical contact that I've heard of going on. You guys might know more about that, actually.
Yeah, in my experience, zero.
Yeah.
Body stuff. Some, so to speak, etheric stuff going on, supposedly. But yeah, no real body work and no real integration. I don't really remember being asked any questions. It's just like, all right, have a nice day. Not really that abrupt, but it was a little more abrupt than I was used to from having so much breathwork experience.
So I think that's an aspect of holotropic breathwork that is so fundamental and exciting. I mean, you can tell from having been around me how much I love the body work.
Yeah, the body work kind of propelled me to look into the somatic piece of doing, going to get my degree in somatic psychology. I've had such profound experiences in the body. And, after having my near-death experience, I haven't really been in my body because part of myself is afraid to be after you've had such a traumatic incident, and especially, having such major surgery, it's hard to get back. And yeah, that's the one thing breathwork has like really taught me, is to be back in my body. And yeah, the body work has been so important, especially for integration too.
And a lot of people, when they're stuck in a session, just stuck, and maybe there's a birth dimension or some kind of birth aspect to that going on, but maybe not. But it's always fascinating to see how just a little bit of body work can help get things moving. I should say, though, that it's important to the goal is to empower people. So if the person can sort of, in the earlier part of the session, if you feel like they're moving through stuff, and you might even see people doing their own body work, then it's really important to leave them alone and not and let them do it themselves, and only help them if it seems like they're really stuck or they're asking for help.
Yeah, that's great advice.
I still stick with, I always wait till they open their eyes. I still try to follow your advice on that.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some situations where you could jump in, but I don't know those yet. So I stand back. So if you don't mind, could we talk about how you got involved in helping Stan edit his book, Ultimate Journey?
Sure. Yeah. So I have a really interesting relationship with Stan's books. In the early years, I didn't really read them much at all because they were so dense.
Mm-hmm.
And Lenny appreciated Stan's scholarship. And it took me a while of just doing my own breath work and having the experiences that Stan was writing about before I had the sort of the excitement and the level of understanding that I needed to begin to even read his books. And the first book I read was The Adventure of Self-Discovery, which was published fairly early on, I think in the late 1980s maybe, or early 90s. And that's still the book that I recommend to newcomers who have like no background in psychology or haven't already read some of Stan's books. I usually will recommend The Adventure of Self-Discovery. But through the training and listening to his lectures and beginning to do our own workshops and needing to understand his theory in order to explain it to other people, I began to read his books and appreciate them and refer to them. And as you know, he's a prodigious writer and was, for a while was publishing books, I don't know, every few years. If you look at the copyright, the date of the copyright, it's like every few years. And we hosted Stan here in Vermont for a couple of big workshops right before Lenny went into cancer treatment. So this would have been like at the end of the 1990s. We did a workshop at Killington and another workshop a year or two later at Stratton, which are both big ski resorts in Vermont where they have nice facilities. And about that time, Stan was working on one of his really major books, which was The Psychology of the Future. And we had already developed our relationship with Burlington College by then. And Burlington College decided, with a little encouragement from us and David Joy, who was then the head of the transpersonal psych department at Burlington College, to offer Stan an honorary degree. So we combined that with one of Stan's trips to Vermont to do, I think it was the workshop at Stratton. He came and there was a really nice ceremony for him in one of the buildings in downtown Burlington. It wasn't a college facility. It was a beautiful hall in downtown Burlington where Stan was awarded a PhD, I think, by Burlington College, an honorary doctorate, and he gave a talk, and he was just getting from the printer the copies of Psychology of the Future, and he was sort of signing them and handing them out, and so I was getting more and more excited about his books, and I realized that Psychology of the Future was a really important book because, as you know, it's a summary. It was intended as a summary of all his work prior to that date. And The Ultimate Journey was a book that was published by MAPS. It was published in 2006. So somehow between 2000 and 2006, I got more in tune with Stan and more in tune with his writing, and offered, since I have a background in editing, and I could see that his writing was a little cumbersome. I mean, he speaks many languages, but I was always wanting so badly to just make it a little simpler or a little more readable for a general audience, which is what a lot of my work in science writing has been about, is how to make technical topics more accessible to lay readers. And so I wanted to do that for Stan. And I guess we had just been talking about it for a while. And when MAPS approached him to do The Ultimate Journey, which was basically an effort to republish and add to one of his earlier books called Human Encounter with Death that he had co-authored with his first wife, Joan Halifax. But they couldn't just reprint that book because of some issues about authorship and Joan's willingness or lack of willingness to just have it redone again. I'm not sure what those issues were. So the idea was to incorporate some of that earlier material, but do a complete rewrite and then add the case history studies that he had done at Johns Hopkins, his early psychedelic work. So The Ultimate Journey is basically in two major parts. The earlier part one, if you will, is about approaches to death and dying among different cultures. So he looks at a variety of cultures, ancient, contemporary, indigenous, and each chapter describes a different approach to death and dying. The books of the dead, the Egyptians. Fascinating summaries, also with beautiful art. Again, Stan's art background coming to the fore, this book is loaded with illustrations, which made it a real pain to edit, because getting permission and getting all the captions right and everything was a challenge, but worth it. And then the second part of the book is a compilation of the case studies from Johns Hopkins, some of them with introductory material, and then actual transcripts, excerpts from some of the sessions, very moving work. A lot of those videos were lost in the fire when Stan's house burned down. So to have it in book form is very, very important. And then there's a couple of very interesting appendices to the ultimate journey, one of which is the account of Aldous Huxley's dying process, which was published with permission from his wife, Laura. And that's in the ultimate journey, too. So when MAPS decided to publish this book, I'm trying to think exactly how it was that I got involved. I don't remember. I just remember Stan and I corresponding and him talking about the book. And I think he may have given me some preliminary chapters to look at. And I kept making suggestions. I'm such a compulsive editor. I can't help it when somebody shows me a piece of writing. And so he asked me if I'd be willing to edit, and Rick agreed to hire me to do that. And of course, I was totally thrilled. I said yes without thinking really twice about what commitment it was going to be. And once the process was underway, it was very wonderful and very intense, because you know what a prolific speaker and writer Stan is. So I had a lot of material to wade through, and I worked very hard on it for probably a couple of years. Maybe it was, I think the actual editing took, he would hand me it was all done digitally. So he wrote everything in Word documents and would send me the drafts as chapters. And then I would edit them. I would track all my changes, send it back to him with changes tracked. He would go through and then send it back to me. So there was a lot of back and forth. He was very gracious about my suggestions. And it was just an amazing process to work with him and to pick out like the quotes he was going to use at the beginning of each chapter. At the beginning of each chapter, there are some beautiful quotes, like Victor Hugo. There's no spectacle greater than or deeper than the sea. That is the sky. There's no spectacle greater than the sky, and that is the human soul. I don't have it exactly right, but that's one of his favorite quotes. So just to be able to kind of witness all of that and participate in, even in an editorial way, was wonderful and exhausting and stressful. And when it was all over, my computer crashed.
Oh no.
But luckily I had finished the manuscript about 2 months later. I mean, it was a bigger project, of course, than I had anticipated, but I'm really, really glad I had the opportunity. And we actually did a second printing of that book a few years later and made some more, minor corrections, because there were always some things you miss in the first printing. Mm-hmm. And we had a whole team of people that worked on the project at MAPS. Brandy Doyle was the production manager, and Mark Plummer was the guy who did the layout and design. The cover of the book, it's a really nice cover of a figure sort of sailing through the cosmos. And after that book was finished, Stan asked me to edit his book on Giger and Giger's art. And I did work on that manuscript and he had a publisher for that book, but the deal with that publisher fell through, and so that manuscript got lost in the when the arrangements with the publisher fell through. So the Giger book that was published most recently through MAPS actually wasn't the manuscript that I worked on. But it's a beautiful book. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's got lots of illustrations, and it's a really nice book.
I think I've skimmed through it a few times.
Yeah, it just came out a couple years ago, I think. Yeah.
I think Stan gave me a copy.
Yeah. It's got a picture of one of Giger's, you can always tell his work on the cover. There's a lot of other art inside the book besides his. But working on the Giger manuscript with Stan, the first one, was really interesting because I remember I took it with me on our trip to India when we went for a Whitehead Process Studies conference in India. And that was a very intense experience, the trip to India, and also the manuscript, which was about Giger's art and his biography and how his history and his art inform one another. And it was an interesting experience for me to be having sort of these doubly intense experiences at the same time. Gave me a big appreciation for Stan's relationship with Giger and his love of Giger. And I had actually gone through the breathwork training with Carmen, who was Hans Rudy's wife. And so I had a personal connection with her, and was always very fond of her. So I did feel a personal connection to the book. And then when the Holotropic Breathwork book was published, that was a different publisher. So that was done with SUNY Press. The Holotropic Breathwork book is a really important reference tool for anyone, I think, who's offering workshops. I think it's important to refer to that book. And I still go back and try to reread the sections like on the relaxation or the body work before I'm about to do a workshop, just because when you've been doing something for so long, it's sort of easy to think you know everything and you don't need to refresh your memory. But you can begin to forget the basics. And so I do go back to it and use it quite a bit. And that book was published not by MAPS, but by SUNY Press, which is the State University of New York Press, which had published a lot of Stan's earlier books, including Psychology of the Future. And so they supply their own editors. So I did read that manuscript for Stan and made a lot of suggestions to him. And then it went to SUNY, and they had an editor that worked on it there. So I felt really fortunate to be able to collaborate with him like that, because writing and editing has always been so important to me, and to be able to share that process with him, because he's very concerned about his scholarship and his books. And I think a lot of people, I think it's easy to sort of get into holotropic breathwork and not pay a whole lot of attention to that aspect of his work. But I think ultimately it's going to be what he's remembered for. So I try and, we always sell his books at our workshops and talk about them and continue to refer to them ourselves. And that was I've been working on our website these past few days, and I've been thinking that would be good to have a section at Dreamshadow about some of the books, more about his books.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So that's kind of the story of the ultimate journey. Trying to think if there's anything else. He was very easy to work with. He didn't, sometimes when you edit people's work, they don't like it when you suggest ways that things might be said a little better. But he was, I can remember us going back and forth on a few things, but I always felt pretty comfortable suggesting changes, and I think he he was very appreciative and went along with most of what I suggested. It was pretty mechanical stuff, not substantive stuff. It was just because of the way he talks. I mean, his speech is extremely fluent. When he writes, his sentences tend to be constructed in a more formal way, or the order of the syntax is a little check, you might say. So I felt very fortunate to be able to do that.
Cool. So we're over an hour. I think it might be worth talking about what you guys are trying to do with Dreamshadow, if you're willing to talk about that.
Yeah, well, so we've been offering workshops now for 22 years. We love offering the workshops, and we're also aware that we're getting older. And as you guys know, putting on a workshop is a lot of work. It's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of work. And it's been wonderful to have you guys helping us and have other younger people beginning to step up, because what we're trying to do now, in addition to continuing to offer workshops for as long as we can, is we want to pass on our experience to the next generation of people. And our approach has been to basically to offer to mentor with people who come to our workshops as they feel comfortable, give them the opportunity to step up and begin to help out on the floor, do a little more at each workshop, maybe do the relaxation every now and then, lead the sharing, take on more responsibility as they feel comfortable, and then when they feel ready, to help them put on workshops. Because what we've noticed in the formal breathwork training program for holotropic breathwork, a lot of people finish the training but then don't go on to offer workshops, so that holotropic breathwork hasn't spread as much as it could have. And really, I personally think should spread, because it's such an effective technique and it's quite doable for the average person. Doesn't require a whole lot of background in psychology or a huge amount of financial resources. So with a few people like Brian, and trying to help you guys to sort of push you out of the nest and encourage you to go out in the world and just start doing your own workshops when you feel ready, starting small with friends and being there in the background to help you if you need help. We're going to come up to Burlington this summer to do a workshop at the Bishop Booth Conference Center, where we've done one workshop many years ago, just to try and help stir up a little more interest in the Burlington community that Kyle and Isla and whoever else, Luke,
my friend
guys
Lucas
up there, Lucas can, just keep taking that ball and running with it, as we will ultimately, begin to step back. And we have started to step back. We don't go to Kripalu and do the big workshops anymore, just because it's 2 sessions in one day at a big workshop is just more than we feel comfortable doing now. So our workshops, we do 1 session a day and try to allow some time during the day, a little bit of downtime for everybody, which means longer workshops, but not as long a day on Saturday. We've also partnered with Burlington College to offer academic credit in the context of holotropic breathwork, and Kyle, you know all about that. Kyle's been very involved in that, even to the point of designing and co-teaching a class with us there. And so now breathwork is incorporated in Burlington College's integral psychology curriculum and also in their individualized master's program. And we're continuing to talk with Burlington College about ways of collaborating going forth and what kind of certification or credential we could offer people who work with us. Because I think it's important that if people are making that kind of commitment to training that we're offering, it's nice to have it be on a mentoring and informal basis, but they need to be able to have some kind of piece of paper, something they can put on their resume or at their website to say that they completed this course of training. So that's the direction. That's what we're focusing on right now. And we'll see how it develops. I like working at a small scale because I think this work is so deeply personal. And in order for me to feel comfortable saying to somebody, yeah, I think you're ready to go do a workshop, I need to know that person really well, like you guys. I mean, we've worked together with both of you for so long. I know you really well. I trust you. I have no qualms about you.
Thank you.
Offering your own work, and I'm really excited that you're doing that. So I'm more interested, I guess, in that level of comfort than any kind of big training program and at this stage of the game, I can see that Lenny and I aren't going to do that in this lifetime anyway, and I'm totally comfortable with that. I think Lenny may have slightly grander ideas than I do, but that's just who he is. And, if he can persuade me, that's fine, but we'll see. I tend to be a little bit more realistic in certain ways, and he's got the creative vision that I need in other ways. So I'm not sure how it will shake out, but we do want to encourage people as they feel comfortable and ready to, at some point, offer the work to their friends, share it with their friends, and then maybe bring in other people and find the right kind of setting that works for them. I know, Kyle, you're now working with young adults who are going through extreme phases, crises. Maybe that's a population at some point you'll want to work with on a more experiential level. You're getting a lot of good experience. And likewise, Joe, you have your own group that you're comfortable working with. And I think maintaining that level of comfort with the work is what allows you to create a safe container for people. So I really do encourage people to start small and just let it grow in a very organic kind of way.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing, just starting small with some friends. I haven't offered a workshop in a little bit just because of work and starting grad school and stuff like that. But yeah, I've been kind of taking this organic process of backing off and then doing workshops and helping you guys out when you need help. It's been interesting so far.
And like when we do workshops with groups of younger people, like Burlington College students, or when we did that workshop at the University of Massachusetts at Lowell.
Oh, yeah. That was great.
March. I guess it was in March or April.
March or April, yeah, last year.
I think it's always really important to have younger people working the floor so that the participants, if you're working with a younger age group, we're there and we have a lot of experience to offer, but it's also good to have people on the team that the participants feel like they're more, it's more their peer group almost, to have that kind of connection. So I really like having the range of ages involved in a team. And I love at our workshops, we often have people ranging in age from their 20s to 70s and even early 80s sometime, which creates a lot of interesting cross-fertilization across the generations. So our phone is ringing. I'm just not going to answer it. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No worries.
It will stop soon. So I feel very encouraged to see people starting to offer their own workshops, and even if they're not called holotropic breathwork, that's okay. It's just the basic principles that are important. And I think it's important that people know what your lineage is, you know, who you've trained with, who you've studied. When I look at websites of people who are offering other kinds of breath work, or I'm trying to figure out if it's a genuine approach or not, I'm always looking to see how much the team or the facilitator, how much they're willing to say about themselves. What is their, you know, what's their background? What's their personal story? Who have they trained with? I think that's important. I think that's more important than whether you've done this particular kind of breath work or that, you know, the particular kind of breath work. So
yeah, it's a strong insight.
Yeah. And the more experience you get, obviously, the more comfortable you get with it too. And you're always learning. I mean, I learn stuff at every workshop. There's always challenges, no matter how much experience you have. But after a certain amount of experience and partnership, because I think it's important I think that the team approach is really helpful in this work. So I encourage you guys to, and I know you're already doing this, I know you're already thinking about people that you feel comfortable working with, so that when there are situations that are challenging, it's not all on you.
Yeah, my first workshop, something came up, and I was so glad that I had somebody else there, especially a female body. Just a situation that arose during the session. It was great to have that extra body in the room to help out.
That's why if you are starting off and, you know, start on your own, I mean, I would feel fine doing it on my own with friends, people I know really well. But a public workshop, I would not attempt on my own, even at the stage of the game.
Yeah.
But if I know everybody, and even now at our workshops here, I try very hard to make contact with new people, or I do make contact with new people before they show up. So I try to have a phone conversation with them, or at least exchange enough emails so I know basically, you know, kind of why they want to do this, a little bit about their background, enough so that I feel comfortable with them coming. That's really important, because if I don't feel comfortable with them coming, how can I offer them a safe space? They'll pick up on my anxiety, and that will affect the whole group. So that's another tip I would pass along. And that's one of the reasons the big public workshops are a little nerve-wracking for me, is because sometimes at the big public workshops, you're with a group of 25 people. You've never met them before. You haven't had any previous experience. And we're only now looking at their health forms. So that's a little, for me, that's a little anxiety producing. I like to have some kind of contact with people before the workshop. And also, I think they feel safer coming, feeling that they've made contact with you, so that I'm not a total stranger to them when they walk in here. I'm kind of going back and forth on that now with our website, because obviously I'd like to be able to have people register and pay online. But if they do that, I have to I think it can be done. I just need to figure this out and get Chip, our son, helps me with the website. I want to still have that opportunity to have the conversation or the back and forth with them before the workshop. So we've got to factor that into as the process gets more automated, we've got to still have that capability in there somehow.
Yeah. Safety first, right?
That's the most important thing. Absolutely. Not just their level of comfort, but your level of comfort, my level of comfort. Knowing that you can't make things 100% safe, but you just do what you can and then deal with whatever comes up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we've been on for a while now. So thank you for everything.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Do you want to get into anything else? I
don't know. I don't even really know if I answered all your questions. I hope I did, or
you did great.
Talked about them. I guess we could have a follow-up conversation sometime if we think it would be helpful.
Yeah,
excited
absolutely.
About the bodywork workshop. I'm going to try and write some things down this time, and I'd like to get some kind of manual or collection of our stories written up. I
think Kyle and I would like to help you with that.
Definitely.
To whatever capacity we can.
Yeah, so I
think it's important.
And I'm also going to be doing a little dream work at this next bodywork.
Awesome.
I don't know. Were you at the one last time we did it 2 years ago?
I was.
We did some dream work, so it really fits well with the body work and the breath work. So I'm excited about that. So
I think in the context of a retreat, that's huge.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. So I'll keep in touch with you about that, and as I do pull stuff together, I'll just post it somewhere where we can all look at it and add to it.
Fantastic.
Compile our stories, and it'd be fun.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
And what was your website again, Elizabeth? Dreamshadow.com?
That's right, dreamshadow.com. Thank you, Kyle.
No problem.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you.
Fun to work with you. I'm looking forward to more.
Definitely.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again, Elizabeth.
Okay,
Take care.
You too. Bye for now.
And there you have it. Psychedelics Today with Elizabeth Gibson. Thank you, Elizabeth, for joining us. Kyle and I are very happy about you being able to spend that much time with us to record. Can't wait to see you in Vermont in the near future. So speaking of which, July 31, 2016, I believe it's that weekend, we're having a workshop where Kyle and I will be there with Elizabeth and Lenny, facilitating along with some others at a retreat center. So, feel free to check that out at dreamshadow.com, and I'm sure we'll link to it from Psychedelics Today. Please, if you enjoyed the show, give us a review on iTunes or on Stitcher. We'd really appreciate the help. Tell your friends. Maybe just share the episode on Facebook or email it around to people. Anyway, thanks for listening, and we'll share another show soon. Bye-bye.